Today, I wanted us to focus on Dispatch Friday. We had a fairly brief but very productive discussion about where we thought we were going to go, which was a project manager and combined. I've been asked if we're going to do a strike all. I'm kind of avoiding that, but maybe, if it's just easier, we will. But they are going to be putting money in the budget, and I think they are looking at the 9 million unexpended right now, because I believe the 11 million is in the jurisdiction of public safety.
Right, 11 million in the
Yeah.
state federal,
Right.
9 million, I'm sorry.
9
State
million,
general fund,
right.
9 million federal fund.
Which we should talk about.
Okay, that's what we need to know. Anyway, they're going to put it in with how it will be expended, so we need to make sure that how it will be expended coincides with how we would like to have it expended. Basically, it's the same thing. It's on gathering data, how much we need. I don't know if we have the ability to set a realistic time frame, but we will try.
Okay.
So Maria, we sent you out and said, oh, just rewrite this, what is it, 20-page bill?
36 or so.
Oh,
But,
36, okay.
Yes, so Maria Royal with Legislative Council. So a big chunk of the bill has to do with updating the 911 chapter, because the decision was made in Senate GovOps to have 911 take over dispatch, expand its jurisdiction. So it sounded like, based on some of the discussions last week, that maybe you weren't there yet, that you weren't quite ready to make a decision that 911 should be the ultimate overseer of dispatch. If I'm wrong, correct me, but that might end up being the recommendation based on the information you collect, but that may be not quite so outcome determinative at this point.
Right.
So that's a lot of the bill. So if that's taken out, what you're left with is the inventory, the design, and a recommendation for financing model. Those are the big areas. So what I put together for you to kind of talk us through the decision points, understanding that there's some overlap, and we'll just go through it. I tried to keep it very short. The key decision points. Kept it under 3 pages. I realize it looks a little bit like Mad Libs. That was not the intent. But really just wanted to focus some of the areas for you to really make some decisions, and also the testimony here today might inform those decisions.
Thank you.
So we'll just read through it once. I think you'll begin to understand, how these all kind of interact and what the information might impact the timing, right? So
I'm just enjoying how you dealt with this. On passage, person, entity, in consultant with or not.
right. So that's right, because if you're going to decide for each of these who is the right entity, an existing entity, a new entity, whatever, and if it's someone in state government, should they consult with other departmental agency heads? And so this is these are the important decisions to be made. Right. So let's just read through. And again, this is regarding the inventory of the. So on passage, whoever, in consultation with whoever, shall inventory all aspects of regional dispatch services currently provided in Vermont. So that's looking at facilities, equipment, personnel, technology, communications systems and networks. I have a little bit of a footnote because that also might be information that, and Commissioner Morrison can speak to this, that she might be looking at. So there is some overlap. I just want to be clear. Operations, the catchment areas, right, and the various response agencies. It's not an exclusive list, but this is the type of data that would be inventoried. And then, the inventory, if you want, may be completed by a consultant. If you want to appropriate.
Otherwise known as a project manager.
Project manager, yep. Appropriate specific amount of money for that. And then the inventory shall include identification of municipalities that face the greatest challenges with respect to the provision of dispatch service, and those municipalities that are likely to be most affected by either the curtailment of dispatch services from the 2 state-run PSAPs or from a new financing mechanism for the continuation of those services. So leaving it very open-ended, but understanding that there are some entities not paying municipalities and also receive services. So how, focusing in on those as part of the inventory, and then just, the inventory shall be reported to whatever legislative committees. And then if you want to specify a date of when you're hoping to have that. And then in terms of the design in subdivision 2, so this would begin on passage, again, looking somebody to kind of take the lead in consultation with the relevant people as necessary, shall design a statewide public safety communications system comprising an integrated 911 system and a dispatch system. So whether they are operated and overseen by the same entity, different entities, the idea is that they're going to be integrated as they are now to some extent. The system shall incorporate standards and procedures to ensure it is reliable, secure, efficient, interoperable, and universally accessible by all persons throughout the state. The design shall recommend a governance model to ensure effective state and regional oversight, management, and continuous improvement of the system. The designer shall develop cost estimates for implementing such a system in Vermont, including operational and capital costs. And then again, you can authority here to hire a project manager or consultant and appropriating money for that purpose. And then on page 2, to the extent you want to involve kind of stakeholder input, you have options. So Senate GovOps set up a 17-member advisory committee to advise the whole transition to a new system that they, a new model. So you could do something like that. You could also have who's ever in charge of the project manager or the project manager themselves develop a process for receiving stakeholder input, holding public hearings, having a preliminary design distributed or public, right? So some options there, recognizing that you want to get as many stakeholders involved as possible or as necessary. So then 3, regarding the financing. So again, deciding who is going to develop this and conduct this study. So this entity, this person shall analyze options and propose a model for sustainably and equitably financing a statewide public safety communications system that shall include consideration of existing budgets for regional dispatch, existing and potential municipal, state, and federal funding streams, population and call volume of each municipality, funding shortfalls for the 911 system under the Vermont Universal Service Fund, and also consider stakeholder input, whether it's through public hearings or other mechanisms. And again, this can be done by a consultant. Money can be appropriated for that purpose or just to support whatever state entity is doing this. And again, the proposed financing model is submitted to legislative committees and you can pick a date.
Okay.
And then in terms of where the money would come from to support, provide resources for these inventory design and financing model proposals, basically redirecting the $11 million that was appropriated last year And then there's the question about the unobligated amounts, whether you want to just keep those pending the information that you receive, and then the legislature basically further dispersing funds, whatever you think is appropriate. And then the last issue, and I think the commissioner is going to speak to this, you have the $9 million in federal funds. A lot of blanks here, just because I'm not as familiar with the timeline.
9/11, it's floating around in the ether, and
I think the
we need to
important,
tie down
I think,
how much money is where and what it can be spent
and what it
on.
can be spent on. I think we'll hear about that, and how whatever is that money is spent on, whether it's mapping efforts or whatever technology, that informs and is shared with whoever's doing the other studies, right? So that you can see how they're not exclusive, but there's a lot of gathering of information that's gonna.
And it's got to be melded together.
Right.
And, when we look at in consultation with,
Right.
I think a lot of consultation is going to have to go on with the communities. You know what this bill doesn't have, and we aren't doing as much as we used to, are findings.
There are a lot of findings in the bills introduced.
There are findings in the,
Yes, there are.
okay.
Yep.
I'm
So,
just thinking that as part of the findings, I'm willing, I don't know about the rest of the committee, to be the bad mother and say, as of date certain, the state police will no longer be doing dispatch, and all towns will be providing it, and all towns will pay an equitable amount towards the system. Which I think lays the groundwork, which I hope would encourage towns to become involved, because they are going to have a stake in the outcome. It's the days when you can just sit back and say, well, I'll just write it out or over. But findings is the place, and we'll have to find the bill as introduced. Yes, I've seen bills that the findings are longer than the bills.
yeah, so they're about 3 pages of findings, a
Yeah,
little bit
that's
less. But if you did want to have a date certain for the state-run PSAPs,
Mhm.
providing, I wouldn't put that in findings unless you're
Yeah.
if you really do want to set that date
Well,
legislatively, or if you just want to set it as a
Commissioner
goal.
Morrison, but I think the longer this drags out, the longer a fair number of communities are not paying their fair share. And we need to find somewhere to let them know that the rainy days are over, and everybody needs to be involved, and everybody needs to get benefit. So, okay. I think you did an amazing job of taking
We'll
some
see.
free-ranging discussion in here on Friday afternoon and making
Are you
it.
filling in those blanks?
Yeah, well, that's the,
Who's
that's.
responsible for filling in the blanks?
That'd be you.
I was afraid you were gonna say that.
We just asked Maria to fill in the blanks. Okay. All right, Stephanie is not here. Kate Morrison. I don't think you've been here.
I don't think I have. The record, my name is Jennifer Morrison. I'm the Commissioner of Public Safety. My title is no longer chief, although I'm appearing on all of these, but that's, no, you can call me just Jen, really. But thank you for having me here today. There's 2 things that I want to talk about, and then I'm certainly available for questions, and I will remain in case things come up as we work this through. I don't think it makes you the bad mom to be firm and establish rules of the household. And we do support a sunset date for responder agencies that are not state agencies. coming out of our PSAPs for their emergency response dispatching. I would point out that we need to honor a contract, I believe, that was entered into between the Agency of Human Services and the town of Berlin. Something to do with them building a building in Berlin, and they signed, the state entered into a contract prior to my time, allowing.
That's interesting. I don't know about that either.
Yeah, allowing
I
free
know.
dispatching, Mr. Chain might actually know
You
about
know,
it.
you just introduce yourself for the record and just tell us if we can pick you up over there.
I'm Kimberly Cheney, former Attorney General and 9-year member of the Vermont, Central Vermont Public Safety Organization. And incidentally, author of a complete revision of all state governance for education in the 1960s, together with
So we know who to blame.
revising criteria for custody of children and how to do adoptions. The particular question that's asked, and I don't know how this happened, but the Department of Public Health wanted to build a new facility for mental,
Psych hospital.
yeah, people who are dangerous
Yeah,
in Berlin.
right.
And they drafted a contract that obligated public safety to provide dispatch services for police. To my knowledge, without any consultation with public safety.
That's how it was told to me, but I wasn't here then.
And with my attorney general hat on, I said,
Okay.
I woke up one day and I said, how can this be? Because I woke up one day and one state agency was suing another. And I said, wait a minute, we're one state, you can't do that, and stop that practice. But I think in this case, I always looked at it and said, the state seems to be committed to it, so I'm not gonna sue anybody over it, but it seems.
No, we're certainly intending to honor the contract. I mean, that was a much needed facility.
But the good news is, it's only police and,
Through 2030.
yeah, and City of Montpelier dispatches fire, and I think Barrytown dispatches ambulances.
Actually, Lamoille dispatches Barrytown ambulance.
Well, okay, but,
Not logical.
well, but that's through,
So now we have 4 dispatches in central Vermont, not even getting into Moretown. Okay. But this was part of when the hospital went up there, there was a proposal to move the secure facility in Moretown, the tent city, over there. That didn't go through, I gather, because I read that the state police were now they are in Berlin, right?
We have a building, we have a
It's the old
field station.
state library.
Library, that's correct.
Yeah,
one of the problems was people tended to escape from the facility of library. It was a more
Yes.
secure facility.
I had one of them turn up at my house.
Yes.
Several hours later, I returned her.
So the whatever legislation should honor that
Okay,
commitment.
so
I don't want it
that
to run afoul of it.
Public safety contract, yeah.
No, it's a Department of Health contract.
Contract with the-
Department of Public
yes.
Safety.
But it is for
Police.
the sake of
dispatch.
public safety. Now, Berlin had a police department when that went
still do.
in. Yeah, they do.
So we are obligated to, out of one of our PSAPs out of Westminster, to dispatch for the Berlin Police Department until 2030 under that contract. So but for
Okay.
that exception, we would strongly support a realistic transition time. I think that saying what that date is, we should say a date and realize that the work that's done in the coming year is going to strongly inform whether or not that's a reasonable date.
Yeah.
So I would think
I would
that,
assume that if we get a reliable system up, that, um, that contract could be renegotiated if there was,
we intend to honor it unless
Yeah.
some other better arrangement comes
Right.
along. That being said, we would suggest that 12/31 of '26 be an end date for the two state-run PSAPs. And I also would ask that the bill not refer to the Vermont State Police
Okay.
providing the emergency
I've heard it
communications.
both ways.
Right.
Who is providing dispatch in the Rutland area?
Well, so the two, we are through the Westminster PSAP. The reason I'm saying that, ma'am, is the Vermont State Police might not own the PSAP responsibility during my tenure as commissioner. It
Okay.
is likely that I will lift the PSAP emergency communications section out and put a civilian director over it.
Okay,
And convert a supervisory position in the Vermont State Police to a civilian position. It's part of the reorganization of the Vermont State Police that we've just begun. Nothing is final,
okay.
but I would prefer that it talks about the Department of Public Safety providing the emergency
But
communications.
not state police, okay,
Correct, because they may not be operating
all right.
the PSAPs in the future. It could be a civilianized division.
This committee, you have to understand, when we hear DPS, it's usually the Department of Public Service.
Okay.
So it's just taking me a while to switch that in my brain as it goes through, okay?
So the Department of Public Safety should be named as the
Okay.
responsible party, and that work would get done through one of the divisions of DPS, and that may be the Vermont State Police, but it may be something else. So thank you, and I would also like to point out, just for the committee's knowledge, not so much for the drafting of the bill, that a decision was made within the last 5-ish years because of the vast inequity of who was paying what to receive dispatching services from our two PSAPs. Nobody's paying except us. So we're taking in no income right now from the towns or the first responder agencies that we dispatch for. So I guess on the one hand, you could say the inequity has ceased, but it's not a good business
Those
model.
towns that are paying
It's not a
for it.
good business model. And so that's what I wanted to say about the sunsetting date. I want to talk a minute about the $9 million in federal congressionally directed spending, and I want to be very clear, that money is not a bird in hand. It is absolutely not a bird in hand. I'm
Okay.
looking at my phone so I can refer to an email that will help illustrate why this is a challenge. When we applied for the money, we were on a very different path, of course, with regional dispatch, and that's what the narrative is that we submitted. It was initially approved. It went up to some place in federal government where somebody looked at what the project was, and they smashed it into a funding stream to be the vehicle for which the earmark comes back to us. It was put through the COPS office as a technology grant, which we were not engaged in a technology project on the previous path that public safety had been on. We were trying to make the landscape of regional dispatching more diffuse. We were trying to do some load balancing. We were trying to address the issues of inequity. We were not trying to build a technology project in the previous version of what we were doing.
Okay, and cops.
Community-oriented policing office. It's a
I
Department of
remember
Justice.
from my days in
Yeah.
judiciary, but wasn't,
So, so here are the limitations as written. And the first one you should know about is that the application with a detailed budget and explicit what we're spending it on is due on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. And I assert to you affirmatively that I have no way to build a budget or a plan pending the outcome of this legislation. There's also a 24-month performance period that dates back to December 29th of 2022. So by the time this body adjourns, we'll be 6 months into a 24-month performance period. To those 2 points, I want to let you know that I have forwarded a draft of a request for an extension on both the application period and the performance period Having been told out of the gate that it's extremely rare to get either, I am working closely with a representative from Senator Welch's office and one from Senator Sanders' office. And we will be sending in the appropriate documents to request that extension either today or first thing tomorrow. And those offices are going to support us, but they are not guaranteed of an outcome. So there is a very real possibility that this $9 million will go up
The
in a.
9 million would go.
That's
but
right.
Not the 11.
No, the 11 is state dollars sitting in an appropriated
Okay.
amount. And for the record, not a penny of it has been spent.
Okay.
2.4 million was approved by the Joint Fiscal Office for us to disperse, but we did not. We stopped immediately when it became clear that this body was going to take up.
So none of those grants have been
None of them.
dispersed.
None of
All
them.
right, I think, were there 3? Montpelier was 4th.
No, there were originally 5, and then the Orange County Sheriff's Office imploded and stopped doing dispatch, so that project went away. There were projects that said, oh, we think we want it, but our ability to take the money depends on how the vote goes at town meeting. So we were waiting on March town meeting to determine whether or not those monies were going to go out the door. I'd have to look back at my timeline. As you can imagine, there's a lot of documentation on this stuff. So we were down to a smaller number of projects, and in the initial release of funds from Joint Fiscal, they gave us flexibility to repurpose money if an intended regional project said that they couldn't accept it. You know, they did sort of the Orange County thing, went away, stopped providing service, whatever. So there was flexibility for us to direct those funds to other projects that were on the approved list, but were not in the top 5.
Right.
And there was also $260,000 for consulting, for a project manager and for a technical consultant.
I need to say I'm getting a certain amount of pressure from the city of Montpelier.
Yes, ma'am.
Who was next. They were not, they weren't ready, you needed more time because they were a big project.
So I want to be very clear that all of the awards that went out were very clearly, they were conditionally approved. And so the process of granting the funds never played out fully.
So none of them. have-
Nobody got money from that $11
No,
million.
that's what I understood.
Correct.
And the law, I believe, leaves Joint Fiscal to approve those grants, not this committee. We may, I guess in the budget, they can repurpose, if it's state money, they can take that money and say, it hasn't been spent, so we're gonna reclaim it and we're gonna use it over here for this.
I perceive, let me just say that you can figure out the technicalities of it. The Department of Public Safety under my command would never spend the money, the $11 million, without the permission of the Joint Fiscal Office. It was clearly structured that they would be the gatekeeper and approve, because it was anticipated that these decisions would happen in the off season of the legislature. And we would not contemplate spending any money without full approval. The moment it became clear that there was going to be a bill out of Senate GovOps on this, we wrote to all of the conditionally approved projects and said, we don't know what the future is of this. We are not moving forward with these grant allocations. Everything's on hold till we see what happens. So that's where we stand.
Right, we need to get you out of the middle. I mean, we need to make a decision, not just kind of, we'll help you and we'll help you, but I think the goal of this is to say, this is the system, and this is who's going to make the decision as to where the money gets spent inside the system or within it.
You're not breaking my heart, ma'am.
I know, I know.
Um,
Nobody wants this. We got all this money and nobody wants
I
it.
want to be really clear, it's not that we don't want it, and my comments have been misconstrued in other committees. What I said loudly at the beginning of this was, the Department of Public Safety does not want to be responsible for this unless it is properly resourced, and there was no provision for resources.
No.
And
And still,
it's a massive project. Even doing the much smaller path that we had originally been on was too much for my staff. And there were no funds in the beginning to bring on help. And so I was very clear that as we contemplate a broader definition of what emergency communications means, if we are going to be implicating inventorying assets, strengthening our radio communications, filling in dead zones, cell systems, et cetera, that is so far beyond the scope of a path that was already too much for us.
I mean, your
So I'm not
basic
unwilling.
job is providing police service to every place in the state that doesn't have its own, and then on some occasions, you're the first responders even there.
Well, that's true of the Vermont State Police, ma'am, but we do, we have a lot of expertise and talent in the Division of Emergency Management that works with regional planning commissions and does a lot of planning. We have tremendous assets in our radio technology shop. So there's 7 divisions across the Department of Public Safety. So it's not to say that the Department of Public Safety does not want to be the lead on this project. I think there's a blended approach that is a stronger approach. I don't think that it should be one shop that is solely responsible for this. And it is very clear to me that subject matter expertise is needed. So, but let me get back to the 9 million in federal
Back to the
funds.
9 million,
Okay,
okay.
sorry for looking at my phone, but there's just some specific language in this bill. So we've talked about the performance period and the possibility of extending that, and also the application. The language of this particular stream of funding specifically states that we cannot make subawards. So if the money comes to us, which it is earmarked for the Department of Public Safety, it has to be spent on something that the state owns. That doesn't mean that public safety owns it, but it has to be something that the state owns, whether that's an asset, a service, or something else. So again, it doesn't even jive with the original path we were on, where we intended to subgrant money for capital projects and other things. It does allow, the language of the bill does allow charging for civilian salary and benefits, but not for sworn personnel salary and benefits. And so that does allow the possibility for project management consultants as needed, et cetera. So I raise these concerns to you because this business around it, the restrictions on it, and the tight timeline for the application only became known to us 2 weeks ago. And at that point, the entire conversation has been focused on having $20 million to spend. And
Right.
I just need to say that the 9 million is not a bird in hand.
Okay,
What's the timeline again, please?
So the grant came back to us with a turnaround time of a piece of it is due in a certain portal by next Tuesday. And then you have to submit basically the same documents in a second federal portal 7 days later. So this coming Tuesday, the 18th, we would have to have a detailed plan with a budget.
You could do that in a week, couldn't you?
Get it done by tonight if you tell me to, but
whether or not it.
so we're really really hanging our hat on an extension, because we've asked for an extension until July 1st, knowing that this body may not adjourn until late May. And then we'd be in a better position to direct the
But
spending.
right now, we should only count on the state 11 million in working up a budget. Fortunately, that will get done across the hall. We just need to decide how we would like to spend it, perhaps.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
If the 11 million is already appropriated and firmly in the control of the Joint Fiscal Office, why do we have to change anything? Because I don't want to find ourselves in an area where we've allocated money from a state funding stream, because we're not allowed to supplant state funds with federal funds. So if you put money in a budget that passes for 5 million in consulting fees, and then I tell the feds, well, we're going to pay the same 5 million with your money, I think, but others would know better, that I think we find ourselves in a supplanting situation.
So I think this committee needs to figure out what we want to have done. Then we can move, because at this point, we don't know enough. It might be that we want the state to own the dispatch equipment and you could use your money for I have a feeling we're gonna be setting up someplace to, fill in for Westminster, that, we need to buy that, or we need to buy equipment that can talk to each other. We don't know if we've got 5 towns that can only talk to the town next door and not to the town 3 days over. And I'm not even gonna ask how the whole SafeNet fits into this.
If the 9 million came back and we were not able to supplant anything that you had made an appropriation for, that this body had made an appropriation for, I believe there is still way more than 9 million in infrastructure
Yes.
upgrades, filling in radio dead zones, cells dead zones. I also need to be very clear that that is not the direction the governor's office intended for the regional dispatch plan to go.
Okay.
The path we were on, although needing, clearly now that we've heard the feedback, needing more guardrails, more specifications and standards, like standards for what reasonable governance is,
Right.
et cetera, standards for what type of equipment you can buy with this money so that it's all interoperable. I just need to represent the governor's position clearly that we were not looking to implicate a technology project,
Right.
but here we are.
So. Standards. Okay. Equipment.
That's a question, Chair.
Yes, I was gonna say, if you could just email Jill with what your, and you probably already have, what you think the standard should be, I think, or not but what questions there are
Yes.
that we need to put in this bill, that we need to have answered. I've got the, interoperability, it boggles my mind that I've got an ambulance service being dispatched by a county system that has, but I've got another one here that's dispatching for a town in the same county.
Yes.
Which maybe it does hit Washington County up there in Moose Alley, but they're not.
I want to say, ma'am, that, I've digressed from the first 2
Yeah.
points, which is the 9 million in CBS and the sunset date. I think Maria's approach is actually a pretty good approach that she's put in this short, this is the most succinct. I feel almost traitorous to suggest that you would do a strike through of all the work Senator Hardy's committee did, because that was yeoman's work, and that was an incredible improvement over anything that has happened to date. What I'm trying to get at by saying that this appears to be a structured, measured approach is that there is a tremendous opportunity inside state government with the help of paid point people, project managers, to bring together the expertise of ADS, the Department of Public Safety, the Department of Public Service, the E911 board, and any other stakeholders in the state enterprise to then be able to work on this together. And I said this a while back, but tasking any one entity with that is going to divert all their other front burner projects for the foreseeable future.
Sure. So. And the one I want to make sure in is also the league, since as it is structured, they're gonna pay the bill. But
I think there's some debate about how things should get paid for, and I enjoyed seeing in this draft that would be the specific purview of a certain type of subject matter expert. When I looked at the top of page 2, where you talked about the stakeholder input options, and it appeared as a choice, I would strongly say, why not both? Because I do think that there should be an advisory board, those were just a few of the people that I just mentioned who might be players on that advisory board. But the first responder community should absolutely have a voice in how we proceed. And once there's some meat on the bones, then of course the broader community should of course have a say in how we proceed. So I think that any project with the implications that this one has needs broad public review. So again, Maria, I think you did a great job. You took a lot of stuff and threaded the needle.
Okay.
Can I clarify one thing? So this wouldn't actually be the language, like in the draft form, although it would be very, right? So there are some more details about specific things looking at like the technology, the life cycle costs that are, you could incorporate in here. This is, right? So just.
This was a very rough outline, which I think the biggest decision we came to was we wanted to have a independent paid person or persons that would be responsible for collecting a massive amount of information and coordinating all the various players so that everyone had a voice, and we got maximum value out of all the resources that are out there, and we knew all the resources that were out there. And get it back, back to us. I am not at all sure this can be done in less than 12 months, but it wouldn't be the first time we've asked for the impossible, but this does need to get done. And I think having a date certain, and it's 26, puts enough of a fire under us to do that, because once we find out what's out there, then we have to find out and finance what we need.
Yeah, this is a lot of work. I don't think it can all be done, but I think that if we urgently take on some of the tasks in this breakdown of what I see as 3 different lanes to be running at the same time with different people in the lanes who have knowledge in that lane, I do think that we can get a good distance down the road to having a much clearer vision of what we're trying to build. It could be, in talking to some of my state colleagues, it could be that we end up with an ideal regional dispatch scheme for where the where centers would be and who they dispatch for and who that dispatch center fails over to in the event of a catastrophe, that it's totally architected in the ideal way. And that would take into account topography, the ability for comms to go across a mountain, through a valley, whatever it is, but yeah, through foliage season versus when the leaves are off the tree, all that stuff. That could be the ideal. It is not to say we would ever get there, because there are current operators who are not interested in stopping what they're doing, and that it's working well. And I don't think we should break what's working, but that's just my opinion.
Right.
So I think that we could build the ideal plan and then have a much better idea of what that looks like to find the path forward with the reality as we know it now.
Yeah, I think that's what brought this committee up, is we got handed something that looked like an ideal plan. But the present reality said, we can't support this. So we're trying to find a way to make the towns feel comfortable that they're going to have a voice in what's happening, that those that have been providing service for decades, in some instances, are respected, and see if we can fill in the hole, Santa Frog.
As you've looked at the framework that Maria has requested, and you think of the $9 million that we're talking about, there's 9 million reasons why we should figure out how to use it.
Been saying that for 2 weeks. I'm like, I got $9 million worth of problems.
And so the question is, as you look at this framework, if you had to make a decision that, gee, we can use the $9 million to do this within the confines of the federal rules that you anticipate coming, how would you use the $9 million?
Can I phone a friend?
For example, would you take one of these functions, if you will, and say, this will be done with these particular funds, it won't be commingled with any state funds, and it would result in some ownership of
Right.
something that's a long-lasting asset afterwards?
So the first one would be the section number 1, which is the inventorying. No, I'm sorry, is that the third one? It's not the financing.
Well, the first one is the inventory.
Yeah, the first one, that's right. For being able to map everything that touches the ability to deliver. And when I say that, I don't mean like everything in the universe, including satellite communications, everything else. But when we think about what efficient and safe public safety communications entails, mapping that out of what we currently have for assets and identifying where we might need to add some infill or repeaters for radio comms, where there might be dead zones in cell coverage if that is deemed to have an impact on the ability to dispatch emergency communications.
That was going to be my next.
Right, like if it can logically be tied to the ability to provide, and this guy will have a lot of answers too, so if it can be logically tied to the ability to provide emergency communications, then I would say that goes into consideration. So you would, some of the money would be paying the people to do this work. And I believe that, with the price of things these days, that you would run out of $9 million quickly just trying to build an infrastructure where gaps were identified.
Mhm.
So I do see that as being a potential place to expend the money. It's so far different than the path we had been on that it's hard for me to say this, but that could easily eat up all of that $9 million. The need for subject matter expertise alone would eat up a good piece of that $9 million. And that's in 3 different lanes. You could imagine that we could easily spend $3 million in 18 months, $1 million in each of those lanes. So I don't think that's a perfect answer to your question. I want to also say that the question you asked me reminded me about 2 weeks ago, I said to myself, if I had to do this over before the session started, I would have worked with our partners to build literally a storyboard to baseline for each committee how it actually works. Because I've been very alarmed at the misinformation that's coming from some of these committee discussions about who does what and how the system actually works. And it strikes me that if we had had a storyboard that each committee had the same baseline of information and you truly knew who's dispatching out for who, and I don't presume that we could have gotten to the costs, like the actual cost of all this, but a word picture that might have set a better baseline for this discussion of, and how do you spend the money? Because how do you know how you spend it until you know where you are and where you're trying to go?
Okay.
Well, that leads me to the next question is that as you look at these 3 paths, that are each one somewhat different, as you look at how the efforts are coordinated, should there be in effect some overall call it project manager or something to provide some governance at a top level to ensure that all of these things that are being done separately are being done with a thought line of togetherness and that they're operating well and properly?
Yeah, that's having just seen this when I walked into the committee room and not having consulted with my boss.
We just saw this too, so.
Right. I will speak for Jen Morrison in her 33 years of experience, and I will specifically not speak on behalf of the governor on this because I've had no consultation with him. I would say that you could create a limited service position that would be accountable to Joint Fiscal Office or Barb Neal or to me or to Sean Naylor in ADS, but create a limited service position to be the emergency communications czar or czarina, and make sure that all three of these lanes are being run at the right pace, that questions and resources are, the barriers are broken down that will inevitably come up, and keeping visibility across all these three lanes. So, yeah, I can
And
see
not
that being
one
very useful.
that would report to a 17-member board, which is by definition dysfunctional. But possibly.
You said it, not me.
We've seen it. Whether or not there might be some sort of.
Next meeting with the cup-ups.
Some sort of governance structure, whether it be a board like that has the key stakeholders in this. The key stakeholders are probably someone representing the municipalities, whether it be the league, the Department of Public Safety, ADS because of their role here. Those three, I'd almost look at the E911 board as either part of this or perhaps actually under public safety, quite frankly. Always wondered about the separation there, but that's my view. But a narrow board that project manager, whatever you want to call him or her, liaises with these functions that are being done, and also, but also in effect reports to a limited number of the key stakeholders so that they have involvement too. Does that make sense?
It does, but it feels complicated to me, and I'm also very sensitive to the lack of local input on that scheme, because really the majority of emergency communication dispatching happens in municipalities and a large chunk in sheriff's departments, and the state operates two PSAPs. Whether that's the right number, we could have a whole nother conversation on that dirt road. But let me just say that I think that your concept of a point person to oversee the work happening in these three lanes, as Maria has drawn them, once you complete the Mad Lib here and fill in the blanks, would be useful. And they should have a boss in state government who can help them navigate state government and break down barriers, and who do I go to for this, who do I go to for that. Given the fact that there appears to be some turfing and people like, why shouldn't it live at public safety, why shouldn't it live there? I don't know, does the Joint Fiscal Office have the ability to employ a person and supervise them? It seems like they're Switzerland.
Yeah,
Right?
they don't,
Okay,
they crunch numbers, they don't do projects.
well, so I would leave that to this
Well,
body's
ideally, it
wisdom.
should be somebody who doesn't have a dog in the fight, because
Yeah.
that's part of the problem.
Sure, but I would also say that, so having a boss to report to in state government to break down barriers would be important. I don't think that needs to be exclusive of a small advisory board, but I would not keep it so small as you just said, because I really think the, not just the league, but the first responders who actually do the work and the people who use the communications consoles. So a smaller, maybe 7 or 9 member advisory board, but a point person for a project of this magnitude cannot be an independent operator. They have to be accountable to somebody in state government.
Okay, and not, because as it's come to us, the 911 board with a huge umbrella, and it's expanded to 12 members, I think from 9 to 12, would be the coordinating board.
Sure, an altered 911 board could be the advisory board that.
Okay, I mean, I'm at least trying to respect the work of the other committee.
And toward that end, ma'am, you could put this person under Barb Neal's shot.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's
I
the
mean,
intent.
that
starting
was
out of
what
ops.
I had originally thought, knowing full well that the other body will work on this and they won't have the same intercollegial issues that we've got. Technically, our area of expertise is the funding. We started because the funding was a real issue. But in order to deal with that issue, I think we really do need to deal with the governance structure, because the affected parties didn't feel they had any voice or any control, and it was being done unto them.
Yes.
And I think we're trying to do that, so, but we can't, until we got a formula, but until we can tell them, this is what it costs. And this is the one time, it won't be one time, but this is what it costs to get the system up and running. They don't know what the formula brings up my math phobias, is dividing up.
Agreed.
So we're trying to move us forward.
A totally naive response to that is, we have 11 million that can be thrown at this project, and that is more than enough to get us down this first stretch of work. Assuming the 9 million came online, some of that 11 million might not need to be touched at all. So I'm not sure what there is that you guys have to decide, because everything we've talked about is structural and operational.
Right. And that's what we're trying to set up, so that half the parties don't feel alienated from the get-go.
Well, ma'am, you have my full commitment that my colleagues at the Agency of Digital Services, myself, the small DPS, I don't mean small like they're diminutive, but I always call them the other DPS, and the E911 board, that we will all work together to have this come to fruition. So there is no turf war other than one that someone makes for us.
We just need to get
Yes,
the task.
and there's far greater minds here to talk to you on this topic, so I'll take my leave. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you,
Okay,
committee.
thank you. Okay, committee. Next we have Tom Hanley. Tom is not here.
Morning, Chief. How are you? Good afternoon.
Apologize for the sunglasses, I left my other glasses in the cars, in order for me to see what you're talking about.
That's fine.
All right, my name is Tom Hanley. I'm the police chief of Middlebury. I've been the chief there 32 years. I was a member of the original Vermont Emergency Calling System Board that was impaneled in 1993 to look at developing a 911 system in Vermont. I was on the succeeding Vermont Enhanced 911 Board, where we actually developed the current system that we have now. I stayed in that position until 2001. That's what I'm bringing to the table here. I want to say everything was done right with that board. Before we did anything, we put governance in place, we put an organized board in place, and then proceeded to do the work and the studies that we needed to do with the people that were qualified to do it. And I think that is a path that seemed to make a lot of sense to me at the time, and makes a lot of sense right now. 911 has nothing to do with dispatch. They're two completely different things. 911 board deals with, telephones and routing and all
You
that.
get the calls, dispatch sends out the trucks.
Dispatch is a lot more than 911. And so it takes a little bit different specialties to deal with creating these regional dispatch. Right now, there's a potpourri of disparate agencies around the state. Some are hybrid, half dispatching and half going to another place. It's a bit of a mess right now. And what we're hoping for at the end, we come out with a system that has appropriate governance for the system to implement standards, to implement expectations, to implement everything to training to dispatchers, so that we comply with what the opening of the S-139 is, and that there is a public safety dispatching serves the entire state of Vermont. And that includes dispatch centers that need to fail over to one another when things like that happen. My first reading of this really quick, it would seem to be that we're on the right track here. But we can't do anything until we know exactly what we're trying to build with what we have out there right now. As far as who's supposed to run this place, I've always thought that an advisory board is nice. It's an advisory board. It doesn't really have the authority to implement standards and things. It just recommends, I guess in this case, the 911 board to do that. I think we're putting too much on the 911 board. As a member of that board for many years, it was enough to run the 911 system rather than deal with something totally different dispatch.
So even if we gave you the 3 or 4 new members, but that's a volunteer board, so we give you 3 or 4 new members, you're still only meeting what? It sounds like if we're going to expand anything, we might need to expand what does, I guess, give you more paid personnel. We're looking at a project manager, consultant call, but one person working under the board, which is really under the supervision of the executive director, to be responsible for supervising and carrying this out.
Well, my thought was 2 boards with 1 executive director to make sure the 2 boards work in the same direction together. One dealing with the whole issue of dispatch with their own separate board, and just adding people and making the board bigger. I agree with Senator Knox that this can get unwieldy when there's a whole bunch of people that can't get their act together or can't agree on things, and it can be a little cumbersome. The dispatch, as we did with the early 911 board, was made up users of the system, the people that were going to be dealing with 911. And it seemed to work quite well. It was efficient and things moved along and the system got up and running. We can certainly do the same with dispatch. There's enough talented people in the state that can help move this position, this
Okay,
board
well,
along.
how, you could give us, I mean, the obvious people, the affected parties are going to be the towns, cities and towns, and the people that provide the service, the fire, police, ambulance, the EMTs. But we haven't seemed to do too well in getting them to come together, because some people are going, it's hard to say, yes, we're going to charge our town more. So it's I think we're trying to find a way in which they have a significant voice, but that there are other voices in there saying, and part of it is, I think we can say that, Department of Public Safety will stop providing dispatch services as of this date. Your job is to fill in the blanks. We're doing a lot of that. But it's trying to get an effective board, and I'm having a hard time visualizing that.
Well, I don't want to get into personalities, but it's going to take a director that is a leader, that's going to stand up and guide the board with recommendations from the people that are users, and you've got to put the right people on the board to do that.
Yep.
Otherwise, we're going to be in the same, personal preferences and things like that, and that's not it. There's APCO standards, there's a number of standards to build dispatch centers that are out there that can be used as models, functional things that are working now. And we've really got to pay attention to those standards as well.
Senator Gray.
Chief Hanley, so we've talked about this a little bit before. So how, I think one of the challenges that witnesses have talked about is how do we sort of not throw out the baby with the bathwater, where we have things that are working well, how do we keep them going, and then how do we plan in such a way that somewhere down the line we do have a comprehensive, integrated, standardized system, but we haven't necessarily lost the value that of dispatch centers that are already highly functional, up and running, financially stable, et cetera. Any thoughts on how you preserve the value you already have, things working well, and move to something that is standardized around the state?
Dispatch centers that are already functional and make our job easy. We don't need to throw them out or get rid of them. And Middlebury Regional Emergency Medical Systems runs a dispatch center there for EMS and fire for the region, and it works very well. They have absolutely no interest in expanding or taking on police departments or anything else because it works well for them. They're getting the service, they've got professional dispatchers, and it works. My example, my agency, we are well under capacity. I've got 2 dispatchers, a bank of dispatchers that work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. We are under capacity, so we give our dispatchers other clerical and tasks that we have in the department. And we could certainly absorb more people in there, but then we would have to remove them from those other tasks and move things around. There's a lot of that in the state. We've got kind of a hybrid dispatch system. But we still need a certain standard. We still need a certain quality of service if we're going to achieve the objective of this S139, which is the public safety dispatch, public safety communications. And I guess I don't see issues with keeping systems that are running, that have figured it out already. The problem is the little areas, and I'll use Addison County, the forgotten county, as you know. We seem to have
The quiet middle child.
sort of quiet, not lately. Yeah, where we don't have the resources, or we don't have the dispatching, and we're part of a variety of different places where their calls are going.
But it's efficient for you to have EMT and fire dispatched, and you do police
We do police and local fire
and
and
local
the
fire
sheriff's department.
and the sheriff's department. Okay. This is the first time I've heard the sheriff being dispatched somewhere other than the sheriff. All right. I think that's just getting our our heads around what's all the models that are out there. Okay.
I mean, just break it down from the 20,000 foot view. Somebody calls looking for some sort of service. They answer the phone and they send the service provider to go take care of the problem. And the complexities get into how you're going to do it, how you're going to fund it. What are the capital costs involved if there's going to be a regional center, and there will be capital costs, there'll be recurring costs, there's a variety of different things, equipment costs that go into that. It's just never that simple.
Okay. Thank you. Did we cut you off? Are you finished?
I guess I am.
Okay.
I guess did everything.
We asked questions, I wasn't sure if we cut you off exactly.
No.
Thank you. Has arrived, they've given her a 5-minute break. So you have a fiscal note on this, right?
I can bring it over, but I didn't send it last week sometime.
I saw it here.
And it's fiscal note that went with the bill as it came out of GovOps.
Here's my maps. It is clipped to the agenda. Yes, it is. There it is. Okay, it is clipped to your agenda. Okay. So Stephanie, how much money do we really have?
So there's the $11 million that was appropriated last year. That money has not been expended despite the fact that in November, joint fiscal approved the use of 2.5 of it for grants and for some technical assistance in project management. But the Commissioner of Public Safety has not, because of this process, gone forward and expended those dollars. Those are the state dollars that they're one time. It's not recurring money. It's one-time money. That is that appropriation is there. It's accounted for. It was accounted for in FY 22's one-time list of, because we had one-time money last year. So carry forward is.
So it is one-time money.
Yep. And it has a specific statement in law that comes with it that it's used for these grants. Only 4.5 of it could be used without further legislative input. So if you were going to change something about either who the money went to or how it was used, you would want to go in and amend where we appropriated those dollars last year to reflect what your committee's new wisdom would be.
And I think we know we need to get, if Senator Kitchell told me today she's going to put money for this in the budget, but she needs to specify what it will be spent on. So we need to give her, we just need to make sure both bills are
because this is an existing appropriation, I would say it's, the use of that money is more in the bailiwick of the appropriations committee,
Yes.
but
Well, but
you
I
asked me
mean,
what is available.
if she appropriates it, we want to make sure she appropriates it for what we want it appropriated.
You can certainly make that recommendation.
Yes. But at least have the wording correctly if the money
To
is
reflect what
saved,
your
yeah.
recommendation is.
Yeah. So we don't get halfway down the thing and find out, oh, well, she didn't specifically say this, so we're trying to figure it out.
And the other money that is pending is the 9 million that is potentially coming into public safety, federal dollars. And, you know, what coordination happens related to those dollars, maybe something that can be spoken to, but it may be very restrictive, that there's not much you can say about those dollars.
And Commissioner Morrison has just let us know that she's got some real time restrictions on that, so. Legislative time doesn't move as quickly perhaps as the federal government might like us to. So, okay. So it looks like we have $11 million maybe to play with, but that's state money.
That is state general fund dollars,
And it's one-time dollars.
one-time dollars.
It's no
Its
longer
original
going
intent,
dollars.
as it was appropriated, was to go out to communities.
Right. So, okay. We'll get 9 more, but maybe not. All right,
Is that all you need from me?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Paul White. Here, Paul.
You should be present your day, December 22.
Okay. Then we'll go on to Mr. Whitaker.
Good afternoon, Steve Whitaker there. You've heard most of my thoughts and I've sent you emails as well. I just bring them up to date. Until we know whether our total capital costs, until these inventories are done by the subject matter experts, which I mentioned, especially the assessment of all the radio systems used regionally, that necessitates a team getting up to the top of the mountains, which is weather dependent, to do detailed photographing and inventory of the grounding, the electrical, the tower structure, et cetera. That, to do that task statewide could easily take over a year. There's that many sites and there's that many details, and then the documentation has to be translated into interpretation and design. So I don't think we'll know before next January whether our estimated capital costs are closer to 50 million or closer to 200 million spread over the next 10 years. So I'm just cautioning you about how I've learned how to think about it. I was going to address the drop dead date, but I think you've couched it well enough in that if circumstances change, 2020, the end of the year 26 works fine. Again, you'll be informed by that time whether things are possible within the time range. I really like the format that Maria brought forth. I want to emphasize that the contract for the financial piece, the governor has withheld engagement on this topic, but he has twice deputized me, told me, you take it from here. So in fact, again this morning, he said, that's your bailiwick now, because he was talking about a holistic.
Leave me alone.
He was talking about a holistic approach, and I said, oh, that means cellular, public safety, and broadband altogether. And he said, yeah, that's your job. So
Okay.
I'm gonna play that for all it's worth. Uh, So the financial piece, I think in order to get the governor's engagement, I think that contract to a subject matter expert to dive in deep on uncollected revenues from the telephone personal property tax and from the right-of-way surcharge for highways that have been on the books for years and are not being thoroughly or equitably collected. Those could be substantial sources of ongoing revenue without violating his promise not to create a new tax. It's just collecting the taxes that are on the books. So I believe the most potential is there. And by getting that contract let and getting that product in by December, if possible, you will have brought him fully to the table. He will no longer have that excuse to not be fully engaged. I believe that Commissioner Morrison brought a very good model forward where a piece of this task belongs in ADS because that's where the $1 million plus independent expert reviews are triggered in statute that Senator Aluzzi and I wrote 20 years ago in the committee right behind us. They have strong project management skills and they know how to ask the right questions. Technology architecture review, life cycle costing, cost benefit analysis, all that is in statute. Those are requirements under, I think 33, 30, and I've cited it many times in my. I would encourage you to think about allowing some of the money to fund regions that are ready to go, anxious to get started sooner. I've said before that Addison and Rutland should be our first pilot project as a pair of sister failover locations. None of the proposed projects that came into the Department of Public Safety last year volunteered to pick up Bristol, Virgins, Middlebury, any of those. So there's a capacity there that's relying on the state police that shouldn't be in an ideal world. And most of the load to take off of Department of Public Safety would be in Rutland County right now. So by developing those consistently as a first priority pilot project, working out the inventory methodologies, working out the failover engineering, working out the LTE integration, I encourage you to never fail to miss an opportunity to integrate LTE. The first responders absolutely must have cellular data to safely conduct their emergency responses these days. And so that is not, I am pursuing language and I would welcome this committee's help. This committee is not only finance and fundraising, it is telecommunications. It's oversight of the Public Service Department. It's oversight of decades of failed telecommunications planning. So I would encourage you to work with the Appropriations Committee and condition any money they might restore from the 10 million for cellular to inextricably link it with this public safety plan. This is where the detailed on the ground planning will happen that will infill the dead zones, find the dead zones, infill them, and make sure they're filled with all carrier solutions. It does no good at all in a mutual aid response, a big disaster response, for departments to show up from various places where their carrier was Verizon or T-Mobile or AT&T, and then only some of them have the ability of priority and preemption on their phones. In effect, you're crippling the tools by not pushing forward with a neutral host model. And that's something I've talked to Hunter Thompson this morning, not the one in Las Vegas, but yes. And he understands what I'm trying to do and he doesn't disagree with it, but he may not be allowed by his bosses to tell you that. So I will, I've got some suggestions. I think an oversight body in the near term, I don't think we should fall into the trap. It's too early to assign this to either DPS or 911 or ADS. I believe that you're going to want your subject matter experts. They has specialized groups that work on governance. The federal government has for 20 years put out extensive guidance on how to convene statewide and regional governance. Vermont has ignored it. That's on us. So don't presume yourselves to be knowledgeable enough to create governance that's going to work right now. Get the subject matter expertise to report on that. Inventory the capacity, the staffing, the capabilities, the leadership in these different agencies, and bring forth a recommendation by the end of this year. And so your bill next year will actually create the new board, which will probably have a bit of oversight over each of those: ADS, DPS, 911, PSD. PSD regarding the telecom plan, ADS regarding the independent expert reviews, use co-location and use of state-owned infrastructure, which is all under ADS. 911 in relation to the database and mapping cell coverage. They have the only database in the state of where we do have cell coverage, and it's considered proprietary. The carriers do not want us to know. They want to sell you service based on fuzzy maps. We need accurate maps in order to fill the dead zones and keep our people safe. So I think that I'm recommending a body of 7 to just supervise this project between now and next year until you can pass a bill. The makeup of that body of 7 would be Secretary of ADS, Director of 911, Commissioner of Public Service, 1 from the Vermont Chiefs of Police, and I would nominate President Company. I did ask the Colchester Police Chief before I said that. The chair of the Regional Dispatch Work Group is Paul White, a League of Cities and Towns Municipal Select Board member, and someone recommended who General Knight has identified. He's got an expert project manager, IT capable person that he would. So that's a very nice balanced board just to keep this moving without diluting and confusing. It's too early to try to address every agenda of every local and municipal type of agency. I think we can keep them fully engaged with newsletters and updates and progress reports and surveys, and having the subject matter experts stay in touch with them. So I've got more detail, but I won't bore you with it here. I think Paul White's got more to say here than I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Board suggestions. Okay. Okay, Paul White has joined us. Welcome.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good.
Turning you up, so.
Well, I apologize for not being able to join you earlier. I just jumped from one Zoom meeting right into another, but
How that
just,
goes, we're glad to hear you.
just for the record, my name is Paul White. I'm the chair of the Barrytown Select Board, and I'm also I guess still the chair of the Regional Dispatch Working Group that was created by last year's legislature. So I'm not sure, I was invited to come see you again today. I wasn't sure, was there something in specific that you were looking for from me, or are you just looking for me to share any other thoughts that I had?
Okay, I think this committee last week we're trying to find a way to move us forward that is effective and functional. I think we have concerns that having a volunteer board, even if you add 3 members and, an executive director to do the volume of work necessary. And I think we've decided, we're concerned that the league wasn't supportive of the bill as it came to us, mostly because they were being assigned the duty to pay and didn't understand or feel they had any control over what that was. I'm sure as a select board chair, you
Yeah.
understand those sentiments. And so we're trying to find a way to be able to say to the towns, this is what it's going to cost. And we've talked about, we really need inventories. We need to know what's out there in personnel, equipment, real estate, skills, training. We need to know what's there. We need to know what's missing and will need to be put in place. And once we have that, then we can start talking about a payment and or governance structure. But this was in a few minutes on Friday afternoon. Maria has drafted that, and it is on our website, Jill?
What you do today?
Yes. Okay, so if you can get on our website, Maria's, there's a lot of things that say one passage, person or entity in consultation with or not. There's a lot of blanks there that we need to fill in, but that's where we seem to be going. It right now looks like it would be under the supervision of the 911 board, but it's also been suggested I think we're definitely going to hire a person or persons to complete all the necessary fact-finding, inventory, and then to lead future discussions. It's also been suggested that we might want to set up a sub-board of the interested parties like digital service, public safety, and have them work at it. So we're just trying to get this put together so that it's hard to send a bill out of here where the people you're supposed to be helping don't support it. And so we're trying to build a stronger coalition.
Understood. And I think I agree with pretty much everything that you just said, Senator. I haven't compared notes with Gwen to know exactly what the league has said about it, but I do agree that if you're getting the impression that the towns are not on board, I think it's because, like you just said, the bill that was originally introduced takes away local control while simultaneously asking the towns to pay for a new state governmental entity with no voice at the table. So if we can find a way to not go that route, I think it would get a lot more buy-in from the municipalities. And I think so. Just thinking through my head this morning about this bill and what can be done this year. I think everybody has acknowledged this is a problem that's been developing for many decades, and I'm thrilled that the subject has gained this much attention and as much traction as it has this year. It's long overdue, and I hope that we can just keep it going and get it across the hall to the other chamber in time to salvage something. I think there's a few things that I would like to see accomplished is, between now and January, we need somebody, whether it's a contracted subject matter expert or whoever, to start working on the governance models, in the strategic planning. If we're going to expect municipalities to get on board with this and to start paying for it and be happy about it, they need to be able to have some say as to how things are done, not just be at the mercy of a city manager or a police chief who says, this is the way we're going to run our dispatch center, whether you like it or not. Another thing that needs to be done between now and next year is, as you mentioned, Senator Cummings, the inventory. We need to know, what do we currently have, what do we need, and what do we not even realize that we don't have yet at this point. And that's going to require some expertise that may or may not exist, within state government. And then of course the funding. I think it would be a lot better received if the funding for this system, whatever it ends up looking like, was some kind of a split between state and local funding, rather than all of it being put on the burden of the local property tax. I'm not sure what else I can add at this point.
Okay. Committee, any questions? Thank you. I think we've heard a lot today. Send around, do you have a question? Okay. You just popped up on the screen, but I think the screen was just changing configurations. All right, thank you. And anything else you think of, feel free to email me or anyone on the committee. People you think might be on a steering committee, that might be a better way to phrase it. Okay.
Okay, and I'm sorry, did I just barely, as you know, just barely jumped on? Did
Yeah.
you say there is an updated draft on the committee website now?
There is, yes, but it's just more of an outline in words. There's a lot of blanks we need to fill in, and then we need to refine.
Okay.
But she did a remarkable job of getting our kind of free flow thought on Friday afternoon into a comprehensive whole. And I think that's what we'll be working off as we move forward. And then we need to see how it integrates. We're trying to respect the work of the other committee. We're really into funding, but we really can't fund until we know what we need to fund. So that's where we're working. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
I can't have, no, people from the floor can't ask questions of witnesses.
No, it's to you.
To me.
There's a very important and public safety element that I forgot that would take 1 minute.
Okay, let me finish
Yep.
with Mr. White and you can come back. Okay. Thank you, committee. No more questions? Okay, thank you very much for
Right.
jumping in with us for a few minutes. Okay, Mr. Whitaker. And then committee, I'm gonna give us like a 15, 20-minute break, and then we're gonna come back to talk and discern.
I apologize for leaving this important point out. In my many months of discussions, you often hear the refrain that it's working now, that there's a complacency with don't change anything that's working now, or assumption that what's working now is up to public safety grade standards. But a recent incident I became aware of was the swatting or the alleged active shooters incident where the radios didn't work. And you could get more details from Chief Hanley on this, but the people couldn't hear, the responders walking into a life and death situation couldn't hear the radios inside that building. And when I inquired into this, I found out that it's part of the $12 million that we spent on what's called Lifeline or VCOM, UCOM system, but the system is not working. Jay Johnson yesterday told me it's working now. And I'm saying, no, it's not working now. And that we need to, part of this design process should be to prioritize where the risks are. Because when you got people running into an active shooter without communications, we're putting people at risk unfairly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, committee, let's take until 3:30. Stretch, go outside, breathe nice air. It's about time we start talking about opening windows in here.
Was that listed? Commissioner's right, you need a storyboard. I'm gonna tell you just very briefly what actually happens in the ground in Montpelier. We have two cities, Barry and Montpelier, they each run their own fire and police departments. They have financed their own communications. Then we have the surrounding towns, which I call them some 17 different towns, who are now dispatched from Montpelier under a contract. We hear about people sitting in the building with a phone or something, making calls and dispatching people. That's only a small part of the problem. The biggest problem, the towns had to build a whole communication system, towers, wires, the whole works. And they did it with a earmark grant in the 1990s, some 20 years ago. It's deteriorating. We hired a study to see what could happen and it's not. It's way beyond its useful life. Spare parts can't be acquired. The equipment is obsolete and it needs to be replaced. That should be done today. Not now. The competition for dispatching in the old days is still, no. Barry City also runs a dispatch center. And they employ about the same number of dispatchers. Barry City dispatches for the state, for the sheriff's department, and a couple of surrounding towns. So there's these two centers, but they only survive by having contracts with other entities, the towns, and in this case. And what I have advocated, and I'm not alone in this, but everybody that talks about it, we needed a two-tier system. Senator, you're concerned about the towns. Well, virtually every town with dispatching is now taxing itself in order to provide both the people that answer and send the phone and the infrastructure that makes it work. There are huge numbers of taxes already being raised. The question is, are they being raised fairly? It's just like education. And the only way to make it fair is to have a dual system of state support for the regional efforts. And it's got to be a two-tiered system. If we get the data out, we'll know how much is being spent locally. So we're not raising a tax to do that. That's already there. The question is, how can it be done fairly? Should Montpelier be able to make profit from the towns and they pay less for dispatching? Well, they don't, because they're now self-funding some consoles so that they can dispatch wider and pick up the state police. But we need all this data. Then we need to know what's it really going to cost. And how much of that is going to be on the property tax and how much of that is going to be in this general fund. So what's going on already locally and statewide is a fight for money and funding and jockeying for position. And the only way to build a rational system is to find some funding system behind it and make it equitable. That's what this is all about. I think you're almost there. So
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. Okay, committee. 3:30. Here. back. We are late. So committee. Where are we going? I just sent a copy down to the pro tem and they're trying to try and set up a meeting with me and GovOps this afternoon just for a briefing. But a person or entity. So we want an inventory. We want a design. We want a governance model. We don't want much. Actually, when I envisioned this, I thought the first year we would do the inventory. Then the second year, we would do the governance model. We would also inventory where the lacks were, lack of. And I'm assuming somewhere in Addison in Rutland County, we would have to do some recruiting to set up a center. Which may be, the state owned it.
We close the door. I had similar thoughts about the phase where first year being the inventory and second year being the design. And the other notion that came away from my Sean Naylor conversation is this idea of an emergency communications master plan, the vision of what we want it to be. Because I feel like if we just start designing governance model before that vision is agreed to, I don't know.
Okay, so we've got Sean is from Digital Services. We're gonna try and get him in here tomorrow around 3:34. If we can, we're going to be reviewing the transportation fee increases because they're going to be put in the budget so that the transportation bill made pure. We've been at that, and then on Friday we've got a fee in the opioid bill. We'll look at them. I don't know if the bills will probably come here, but we can take them in and shoot them back out or ask to be relieved. So I'm trying to get Sean in just to see, what do you guys do? And yeah, I mean, what role would you play in this? But yeah, we do. We need, yes, a master communications plan, but that's what all this FirstNet and stuff was supposed to be setting up. But we need, those towns in Rutland and Addison are going to need dispatch ASAP. If they are actually, and I'm assuming that January of 26, it's really 2 years out in legislative time. They're going to be out, then we need to have a plan to do that. I mean, I'd love to do statewide top-down planning and just say, I'm sorry, Montpelier, you are not doing Walden. And Lamoille County, you aren't doing Barrytown. You're all going to come out of the regional dispatch in Montpelier, but I think the towns kind of need the freedom, but if we set a rate and everybody's gonna pay the same rate based on their volume and population and whatever, then there shouldn't be any need to shop around because you're all gonna pay in same, well, maybe not. Senator Ron Hinsdale, have you got anything to enlighten us?
You want me to enlighten you?
Yes, enlighten us.
I can't give you full direction. I think where I've been a little stuck is just, it feels like with this money being discussed, it's not necessarily our money to discuss, but it feels like the integrity of, sort of how we take in dollars and go through a process with people of, accessing dollars and then appropriate those dollars. The integrity of that process feels like it's in question if we start to change what money is for that's already been allocated. That's kind of an overarching concern that I have left over from the communities coming in and saying, this feels like it's being pulled away from us. I could be wrong about the level of finality that they had, but that has remained a concern for me. I think this has come very far with people saying, okay, we're really serious about this. Like we should, we got very close to something that probably isn't workable when it's just in the hands of legislators, and we really need to take ownership over it, not walk away from the table and bring something back to the legislature. So, I think stepping back and encouraging a process that looks a little different is important. What I'm still struggling to understand is sort of what's allowed it sounds like some communities are functioning so well, they felt like leave us alone and deal with everybody else. And, that I think is going to be a challenge. We need everybody at the table, it seems like.
Yeah, I think we do too, because we've got to get the findings. We only have the bill as it came out, not the findings on it. But if the finding is that this is a state responsibility, we're not putting any state money in it ongoing. And, but it is in the best interest of the state that everybody has equal access to emergency dispatch and to emergency services. And that's not true. Some towns are 2 miles away from the emergency service, and some towns are 10 miles, or people are 10 miles up a back road. But they at least need to get that vehicle and people moving in roughly an equivalent amount of time. And yeah, for us to try and disrupt what's already going on would not be productive. But we don't know what is out there. We don't know how old the equipment is. We don't know. So I think if we could get the data, and then we're trying not to specifically designate money for anything right now, because if we do, then if we can hold on to the $9 million in federal funds, it can't be used for anything we've already said we're going to pay for. So we're trying to figure our way through. I think, yeah, Maria's going to listen to this. She has to go at about 3:45. But I think the data gathering I see is if we can get that done by next January and get this set up, that's going to be miraculous. But a lot of it may be out there. You may just be able to call a town and say, so what have you got? How old is it? And who can it talk to? But we won't know. I gather we are set on a project manager, right? Okay.
In my mind, the project manager could well be the head of any of one of these three groups in a dual role. The key is that this thing has got to be coordinated so that there aren't three different groups going in three different directions dealing with the same issue, and in many cases dealing with the same stakeholders, in different forms or formats. And you have the potential of getting chaos unless this is well coordinated.
And I
Not
think,
directed, but coordinated.
Right.
Now, the other thing though, in terms of where the coordination lies, I get a strong sense that the governor does not want to be in charge of this or to have one of his members, although it's something I will ask him directly.
okay,
And the notion of doing this separately with an effective independent property, independent project manager, the question would be, where's the reporting relationship?
Yeah.
The reporting relationship could be to some board or subset of a board with certain of the key stakeholders represented. That's one way. And I was looking at kind of the model we use for the CUD governance, where there's a board or some variation of it. But the key is who owns these various chains, who they belong to. If they belong to a bunch of dispersed boards that aren't coordinated, there again, I think you have a potential problem. One of the things you could do is you could have a relatively small board, like 6, 7 members, and you could have working groups of that board be in charge of various parts of this. And I'm just thinking out loud right now in a way to kind of keep it all together. In that way, the group of people who would be in effect a board overseeing the inventory would be different than those who are perhaps designing, but there would be some overlap between them. But it's that overall coordination that's clear. Now, where would those boards report? Well,
yeah,
they could be in effect independent boards who are reporting to the legislative committees who are responsible for oversight of this. That would be one way to do it. Where would they report during the summertime? There again, I don't know if there's a criminal justice oversight. There are a variety of oversight committees.
there's criminal justice
Yeah,
oversight.
and whether that's the right place for it, because we're talking about criminal on the one hand with heavy public safety involvement, we're also talking about emergency management. Is there an oversight committee that has that
Today,
area of
it's-
responsibility?
Yeah, today it's been joint fiscal because it's been distributing money.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of money involved here, but the joint fiscal get involved in kind of overseeing something of this complexity.
No, we don't, we get reports back.
Yeah.
We might get a report from a project manager, and we might be responsible for hiring a project manager. But generally, we're just a policy, we're an oversight committee, and we can move a little money around off-season.
Mhm.
But this is gonna have to get started off-season.
And, realistically, when you say who basically would be in charge from a legislative perspective, it probably is as much, if not more, GovOps rather than us. We got technology responsibility, but that's limited. And this is not just a technology project by any means. So I'm not sure, it doesn't belong there, I don't think.
So I was looking at the board and who was on that. It's their new board, and I'm not sure that's going into effect for another year or two. Has 12 members, the sheriffs, chiefs of police, 2 municipal officials from the league, a firefighter appointed by the governor, I don't know, emergency medical technicians. I mean, you probably got enough there that one public member appointed by the governor, 2 professional dispatchers.
That's getting down to too low a level, it really is.
Yeah.
It's just too low a level.
Yeah, I'm thinking,
I mean, because many of those things are things that are potentially going to be upended by
Yes.
the consultant who's looking at the structure of the thing. So that should
well,
be
one
where
of
it
these
is.
says, one of the dispatchers is a member of the VSEA, which I thought they're doing dispatching right now, except maybe for the state police, but we aren't touching that. We're taking that function away from state employees, and we aren't making the rest of them state employees, so.
Unless we decide that
We could do that.
dispatch should be done once, not once by the state police and once by the local police.
That is also
I mean,
true.
which is also an issue. Everybody's got turf in this, and that's part of the
Yes.
problem, is that, there's no independent trusted operator.
No, and it's turf with deep roots. I mean, they've been doing this in fundraising. It's like your local volunteer fire department trying to make a change. I mean, we used to say in city government, if the fire department wanted it, they got it because they were very, very popular.
And you want to do the right thing for all of the people on the one hand. On the other hand, you've got to be fair. And one of the issues that underlines all of this is a perception that everybody's not being treated equally in this equation.
No, they aren't. We've got roughly 2 counties that are getting their dispatch services without charge from the state. And the rest of the state is either doing without or paying. And we're not sure on what basis they're paying. The chief said today, you're paying for your dispatchers by charging other towns. I know around here, they've been very definite that they're not, and there's a board and you divide up the cost. And so it sounds like some have formulas, but we don't know what the formulas are.
Actually,
or-
just put all the various solutions that have been advanced in a hat and pick one.
Yeah. Or find out the one that has the least
Applications.
complaints, and right now that sounds like it might be Lamoille County, but, yeah,
I mean, people have advanced things like having JFO be and I don't think that's the right role for JFO.
no, they don't do that.
They don't,
They do research and they get studies, but they don't collect, go out and knock on doors and collect data.
but during the time where the legislature's not in session, somebody's got to be in charge. And I think as a practical matter, the head of one of these groups, if we go this route, is probably the group that comes up, that does the plan. The actual plan is the right one.
Well, I think the first year, we've got to decide who's responsible for the person or persons that are gonna do the data gathering. And somebody has to hire them. And we could ask the Joint Fiscal Committee, we meet in July. I'd rather have somebody, if we give it to the 911 board, Barb Neal, that causes the least ruffles. Wait, this isn't gonna go through this year, though, because it's gotta go to the House. So,
Unless, we have some form of waiver to rules on our side, and then the question would be where the House would be on dealing with something like this at so late a later date, whether or not they would accept it on their side. I don't know, has anybody had any conversations with?
that's one of the things I want to talk to the pro temp.
Yeah, because I think that's really important. I mean, it's important to move this along if we can. It'd be great to use the 9 million, but the timing just doesn't work with that easily unless, the House puts this on a fast track too, and I just don't know if they will.
I doubt it, but we'll try.
I mean, it's like everything else, we have to have a disaster, and there is a disaster potential in all of this, of
Yes, there
systems
is.
failing over and not being able to get resuscitated.
Okay. So why don't we just put the E911 board? It starts out shall inventory. I think the first thing we need to do is decide who shall hire a project manager or managers. They probably need to bring a proposed budget for approval by joint fiscal for somebody, if we're not here. And they'll do the inventory, year one. consult with, the second year, I'd like to put be consulting with the league. Yeah, the system shall incorporate standards and procedures. That sounds something more like the 911 board is used to doing, is setting up standards and procedures and training requirements. And that might mean where digital services could chip in as to what are.
I have a feeling that the only way to do task 2 is you need somebody who knows something about telecommunication system, about these kinds of systems, about dispatch systems. Somebody who actually knows something about this as opposed to, a
Yeah.
person who's never touched it before, who brings a skill. And that's an outsider in all probability. There may be some former employee here, some former somebody here who's got that skill set. I don't know. But who selects the person and what's the hiring process of getting that done? And that is JFO. We certainly use JFO to hire people with legislative assistance, from the expertise within the body
Yeah.
to help them make that decision. So we've done that with a number of functions in the past, I think with various
We've hired
success.
consultants with them. I don't know if they figure this.
Well, this is really a consultant.
Yeah, oh yeah,
It really is.
well, Maria called it a consultant, but it's a consultant who would oversee or cause to be collected or collect themselves, the inventory information.
Well, the inventory information, I think is pretty straightforward. It's the second piece that I think is the critical piece.
Yes,
And I don't know that we have to wait until the inventory is complete. I think some of these can be done simultaneously in order to get this moving.
no, I think you're right. If we have two separate groups.
Yeah, provided that they're talking with each other, provided there's some coordination, which is why I think that overarching piece of
Yeah, the
coordinated
towns are
direction.
not going to sign on until that first thing is done and they've got a budget. But we could have two separate project managers that work well together. Being the communications link between what they're finding.
I mean, the other thing that I just wonder if we've done, and it would be worth doing, is just go out to NCSL or CVS and say, has any other state done a problem like this in which they've used a consulting firm who actually has that expertise? Or is there a consulting firm that has that broad expertise to do this
Okay.
for states or large municipalities?
I'll see
And there
what-
may well be firms out there, whether it be something like the RANDs on the one hand,
Yeah.
or firms that specialize. That we would certainly ask the question, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel or deal with people who don't know anything about any of this to start with.
Okay. I have that on my list. Yeah, I mean, if we've got somebody who's done this.
CFG is
And
having
they didn't
the
do
dinner
that
tonight.
across the hall, didn't ask if anybody else had done this.
Yeah, I'm going,
Where are you going?
the CFG dinner tonight.
When is that? Oh, tonight?
That's tonight, yeah. They have their, Eastern regional person and other.
Oh, that's right.
So it's a way to at least ask the question informally and see what input we can get back.
They definitely have helped with all the, criminal reforms that have gone on. They-
And then we could do, NCSL at the same time.
Yeah.
And at least get some input, because there may be solutions out there that we're not
Yeah,
aware
you
of, or
don't need to
people we're
keep
not
it
aware of, that
there.
we might be able to connect with, who have some
Okay.
experience and who've done it elsewhere.
Okay. And,
So I think just to double back a little bit, I think somebody made a good point that if we're not going to move forward with the financing option that they get sent to us from Senate Gov Ops, would this conversation about next steps not in the direction they propose, which doesn't seem like this committee supports, should they really be GovOps who dove into this more, should we put it to
Well,
them?
I'm gonna try and
Okay.
talk to Ruth. We'll see if she's settled at all. I don't think we're really disrupting them, and I would be very happy to send it back. I think what we're trying to figure out is a way to get buy-in, so we aren't doomed from the start. And I think the fact that you need to hire somebody who is charged, or two or more somebodies. And if we're gonna do these simultaneously, yes, you need to have someone that will work with the league, to talk with the towns, to set up public meetings, to explain what's going on, to explain why you were going to have to pay, to tell them, you know, I think probably their formula is okay. It's what's the number it's gonna be applied to, you know, and what kind of a voice will the towns want on whatever continuing governance. I don't think 2 out of 12 is gonna do it for them.
Probably not.
All right,
But yeah, I think Senator Chittin is right, though, that this has to be, I won't say led or directed, but this is GovOps territory. Aside from the money, I think we would be perceived as putting our foot in their business.
yeah.
On the one hand, on the other hand, I would hope that we could
Well,
indicate,
I'm gonna see if I can broker a truce.
yeah, that if they want to do something, you know, that passes our muster from a financing standpoint.
Right. That this
There has
is
to
what
be
we
some
have come
change.
up with.
Yeah.
But we really feel that it needs to be, they have everything there. It's just, first they set up this big bureaucracy, what looks like a big bureaucracy. And then they set up a formula, and then they tell the towns they're gonna pay for this based on this. And the towns don't seem to feel they've been heard. So I will talk with Ruth and see if we can find something that will work. And then see, you know, how far she wants to work with us. And yeah, because right now, if we do a formula, some of these folks may be paying less and some may be paying more. And if we could encourage there to be more like one regional dispatch instead of 3 or 4, it might work better. Find out. We're about to pump this back to GovOps.
I was gonna say, if you solve Rubik's Cube while I step out.
Oh, yes, we solved everything.
I think all the colors.
We were going to send natural resources and energy, but
Yes. Yes.
we couldn't sell that.
There must be an actual.
Who have we sent this to? Okay, yeah, I will say we're, you know, we're feeling like we're in this, we're in unfamiliar territory. We really think that before we can approve the formula or get it to work, we need to do more groundwork. We need to have a more stepped approach to get the towns to buy in. And I'll see if they can come back to us with more expertise. Does that work?
Sounds like a plan. I mean, I've served for a while, 4 years on the Vermont Telecommunications Authority, which struggled building out. Was just not easy. And so if we don't have like the design, the inventory and design things done, I don't really know how you plan for anything past.
certainly can't plan for the costs.
And you can't tell the towns they're gonna pay for the cost.
They don't know what it is.
Right, so, right, I mean, I went through and the 5 things highlighted, so it's inventory, design, governance, financing, funding. And if I would, seems like if we try to nail down the first 2, there we go. Then you know where you were, and you could talk. Because who's gonna buy into a governance model when you don't really even know what the thing is?
Right. Well, I think that's it. If we're trying to impose a rational system on something that's just grown like wildflowers all over the place, and now we're trying to landscape it, and that's, you know.
Or you have to kill the weeds.
That's right. And find out what the weed killer's gonna cost, so, I think, yeah, and it'll take longer to get the towns to, and they'll have to feel secure that we're just not gonna tell them they've gotta go buy $1 billion worth of new equipment, and yes, if this is a state system, then the state's gonna have to help. Capital purchases. The big thing, that's the big expense.
Yeah. I'm not at all drawn to the sort of construct of local control. We're talking about a
We
statewide
know that.
system.
But we're talking about a state system in which the only money going in is local.
Yeah,
But this is
Yeah,
where
that's
the
fair.
governor had originally come out on all of this is, before he thought that before anybody did anything, there needed to be just a fundamental decision made. Is this a state system or is this a local / regionalized system? And if it's a state system, then, the way you would approach it is very different. And in a way, we keep talking about what is some kind of a hybrid and how workable that is with nobody in effect in charge. I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
Then everybody's in
Protecting
charge.
public safety and welfare is an essential function of the state government.
Yeah, it's like having 2 dance partners, and neither is willing to lead, or both are trying to lead at the same time.
And we can't have it both ways. If we want control, then we're either gonna have to assume the cost, or a good portion thereof, or we're gonna have to share control and fill in the funding holes in some way. Okay. It's probably as far as we're going. And tomorrow we're going on to spending money, our best thing.
248A.
248A.
We're not. As close as we can.
Did,
That's what we always.
and I've asked to have, to give Greg Faber a heads up that he might like to be here to defend the department. But we're gonna do that tomorrow, and then we've got, I would like to just vote captive insurance out. And Chris Booth is going to talk to us about the transportation fees. They're going into the budget, is the plan.
If I may.
Yeah.
I think there's 2 things. So there's the fees, the fee bill. The other thing I think that they want to talk to, Michelle Bloomhauer caught me, that they want to talk about the miles-based usage fee intention that's being proposed and contemplated.
Okay, well, that's gonna stay, I think, on the transportation bill, so that will bring the transportation bill to us. If, yeah,
That's the BMT for public hybrids and fully beats.
yeah,
They're not putting it in place this year. It's using federal
fleshing
money,
it out.
authorizing, seek federal money to flesh it out, whatever it looks like 2 years from now.
Is the fleshing it out going to include doing it for all vehicles? So that at one time, the whole question gets asked.
So when you say all vehicles, this is really focused on EV and plug-in hybrids. So gas cars are not currently contemplated.
Well, we pay by the mile because you gotta,
Gas.
you pay with the gas tax when you gas up. If you don't drive as much, you don't pay as much.
But if
Yeah.
It's not currently contemplated to look at gas guzzling vehicles because they're paying proportional to their road usage through gas tax.
This is road usage.
No, my sense with the declining gas tax was there was gonna be a day of reckoning. And if the day of reckoning thing is being broached through EVs and hybrid electric vehicles, is it useful to just say, by the way, while you're asking all these questions, would you want to ask them about all vehicles? I don't know.
Zero trucks.
Because that would be a fee you could adjust independent of gas usage. And given what the Biden administration just did yesterday, who knows if it happens, no more, what is it, 60% of vehicles sold by 2032 shall be electric.
Yeah.
Shall be
Electric.
electric. So, it feels like that day of reckoning could be coming
Well,
really quickly, and if it accelerates, you start having
You
10
can make
and
electric
15 and
vehicles
20% of the road.
Vermont estimates show that we're expecting to reach 15% of new car sales in 2025 or 2026, which has been the magic threshold number before we want to start.
Right.
I fully understand that threshold. It's like a fee will squelch the adoption of EVs and hybrid electric vehicles, but I mean, was the argument I heard. I don't know to what degree
That's with,
$100 a year changes your mind about moving to an EV.
no, it does not when you're paying $51,000 for a car, but you are putting wear and tear on the roads. And why am I paying to fill your potholes?
No, the sooner the better, from my point of view, so because we're creating our own problems where people say, oh, well, these guys are freeloaders. And it's because we don't address it. So it was 700 cars 4 years ago, and now I think it's 5,000 plus cars.
Where do you get the space for these chargers? Because unless you're using the superchargers, if you drive in Vermont, we're not in, a city where you're going 2 miles a day. I still wonder about the real understanding of the infrastructure needs to do this. Service stations aren't big enough to allow you to park in them for a half an hour each to charge your car.
How many chargers do we have in City Crest? Chargers, can I pull into the Williston Rust area and is there an electric charger there?
So there's 3 types of chargers.
Yeah.
You might get a level 1 charger, which is just extension cord.
Well, that's, yeah, I mean,
Leave your
that's
car
not
parked
doing me
overnight.
any good. I mean, I'm concerned about driving down coal mining country and how many,
Just plugging it home.
if they're not as enthused as we are, am I gonna be able to plug
You
my
can go on
car
your-
in?
You can go on your cell phone and ask for where EV chargers are, and they'll tell you.
And I wonder also if electric car manufacturers talking about the amount of charging that you need to do to go X number of miles are sort of like the internet providers who tell you where there's service.
That's awesome.
Now, I think I may have mentioned to this group before, the car that I rented in Florida during, it was a Tesla, a Model 3. And supposedly, if you found a supercharger, of which there was one within a 30-mile radius of where I was, you could link up to it and you could get it to 80% level, which supposed to be is 200 miles of driving with 15 minutes of charging. And they had 6 slots, most of which were always full. And sometimes you had to wait for it. But when you got it, I found that I charged to 80%. And I drove 6 miles and it read 68%. And
How fast?
I wasn't going that fast.
They can't be kidding.
I wasn't going that fast. And it wasn't cold.
I was gonna say, it's not cold in Florida.
Oh, that's not great.
Yeah.
But I had a couple of instances like that where I was just looking at, being allegedly fully charged and how much mileage I got, and it was nowhere near what was being claimed.
Think as,
I don't think Chris Root's gonna talk about all this.
no, it's not, he's talking about fees. As,
Off track, sorry.
and we're only regulating fees, but as competition comes up, I think you'll find things get better, because in order to sell your car, you're gonna have to, and I think you'll see prices coming down, and the technology.
Prices are gonna come down, and hopefully the mileage and technology will improve, and you'll be able to drive further. And it's the same way with, on the other side of the house, things like heat pumps, you're actually gonna be able to heat your house in cold weather, which we can't do right now.
Yeah, I mean, if I can only get 200 miles, which is half of what I get in my car in a tank of gas, and I'm going to my niece's wedding in Pennsylvania, and I have to wait and then take a half an hour to get charged, what is a 10-hour drive now becomes a 12-hour drive,
And that's
which,
assuming that the fast chargers are in fact available, and that the only chargers, you look around at the chargers we have here, these aren't superchargers.
and there aren't, I can assure you, in cold country, on Route 84, they are not superchargers.
So you get them on the York superchargers.
What do they charge me? They scalp me for gas. I avoid gassing up in New York State.
If you're gonna charge automobile owners based on mileage,
Right,
or mileage weight, the type of car you have.
Yeah.
That's a pretty simple formula. You don't have to collect it at the pump or at the charger. You collect it every year when you register your car.
Right.
Or some. Like even trucks.
that's easy. But I think what we're talking about is what it will take to do a complete switch over. And you're going to have to do more than 150 miles a gallon before it gets iffy. And when do you have to start looking for a charger?
But that's nothing.
No,
To do
but I
with
mean, no,
charging.
but you're the ones that used to talk
Requirement
about
They pay a fee for road use.
an electric gas station. That
I
the
know.
infrastructure is not there yet. You might get one or two charge, on the New York Thruway. But you will get enough traffic, so the risk that you might have to sit for an hour to wait to get plugged in is,
Heaven forbid you run out of power in Guildhall. They'd be there for days.
When they had the big hurricane in Florida a couple of
Yeah.
years ago. And they were saying everybody should evacuate from South Florida.
right?
Tesla reprogrammed its automobiles from somewhere up there. And suddenly they were able to be charged for many more miles than they were able
Uh-huh.
than the buyer had gotten when they bought the car. And after the emergency was over, they were reprogrammed.
That is, I wonder if Tesla owns stock in the electric utility.
Well, it reminds me of my first System 34 computer. I may have told you about this, at IBM. It's a classic example. It cost $10,000 to add something like 128K of storage. And they came in and charged me $10,000 and took out a part.
Yeah.
Or they slowed it down.
I see.
There are some phones that have been done. There's also a rumor that same Tesla employees have been watching pictures that their cameras take of you that are supposed to be very private.
Yeah. I mean, those are things. It gets.
I'm painting all my dashboard black.
Rolling Stones.
There were Tesla hacks in the beginning where people were like taking over a car, like they were shutting it down or forget what else happened. But, this car is not actually, I'm not the only one here driving this car. Someone else is managing things.
Watching me. My car is about the only place I can hide. Okay, well, I'm going down and see if I can broker a piece of cord and look, see where we go with this. But we'll see how it works out.
Oh, peace straight.
But you all just sit here. What is going on in the house? There's a whole bunch of people walking around with guitar cases and banjo cases, all.
Probably getting ready for cabaret.
That's what I thought. At first I said, is there a concert or something?
Thursday night's cabaret.
Yeah, that must be it. Okay, we are out.
I'm sorry, I missed the Senate.